Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 13 of the daily edition. This column evaluates the factors that are responsible for the rising incidence of extreme weather events that are affecting India. Over the last few weeks, particularly the states of Kerala and Uttarakhand have been hit by multiple disasters, including flooding and landslides, as a result of excessive rainfall that these two states have received. We have been covering these disasters in our previous analysis as well. And in fact, over the last few years, the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events in states like Kerala and Uttarakhand have gone up significantly, thereby exposing a large population of India to increased climate risk and disaster risk. As per the data that has been brought out by the Indian Meteorological Department, these two states have been receiving above normal torrential rainfall, and there are several factors which are contributing to these high intensity torrential rains. For example, if you look at the case of Kerala, there were two rain bearing low pressure systems that were active in the Arabian Sea and in the Bay of Bengal. And these low pressure systems, particularly the one in Arabian Sea, contributed to very heavy rains in Kerala, which in turn led to floods and landslides. Then in the case of Uttarakhand, abnormality in western disturbances has brought excessive rainfall to the state, thereby subjecting the state to a variety of extreme weather events. See, western disturbance refers to a periodic influx of moisture carrying winds from the Mediterranean Sea, which is responsible for bringing rainfall to northern India and to northwest of India. But the temperature and pressure differences that are taking place in these regions is directly responsible for these abnormal events, and they are all interlinked and interconnected to climate change and global warming. There is enough evidence to clearly show that climate change and global warming have been responsible for the warming of the Indian Ocean, particularly the northern parts of the Indian Ocean, and as a result, the temperature and pressure differences in the Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea have undergone a radical change. This transforms the way in which low pressure systems and cyclonic systems are formed, thereby bringing very heavy spells of rain during certain seasons, whereas it also creates long dry spells in certain seasons. Similarly, climate change and global warming are responsible for the warming of the waters around the Arctic region, and these overall elevated temperatures in the Arctic is drawing colder air from the polar region with much greater intensity towards the Mediterranean region. So this leads the western disturbances to pick more moisture as they travel from the Mediterranean region towards the northern and northwestern parts of India. The excess moisture they bring in coincides with the unusual cyclonic activity in the Bay of Bengal and in the Indian Ocean, which is capable of influencing rainfall up till Uttarakhand and even extends its influence towards the northeastern states. So the increased moisture being brought in by western disturbances from the Mediterranean and the rising occurrence of rain-bearing low-pressure systems in the Bay of Bengal and in the Arabian Sea has disturbed the monsoon patterns in India, and particularly in the states of Kerala and Uttarakhand. They're responsible for bringing in heavy rainfall, which in turn is leading to several other related extreme weather events. See, rain is essentially an outcome of a complex interplay involving the land, the oceans, and the water. This delicate balance that exists has been disturbed by global warming and climate change, and as a result, changes are occurring in the water cycle, changes are being introduced in land and sea temperature differences, and they are in turn causing pressure differences, thus altering the wind and current patterns. Upon this, the IMD has also noted an unusual delay in the retreating monsoons, which currently is bringing very heavy rainfall to several parts of the country. See, generally, the southwest monsoons retreat in the month of October, especially early October. But this time, it has missed the date, and the southwest monsoon will be retreating only by the end of October, thereby bringing heavy rains to northern, central, southern, and northeastern parts of India. Once the southwest monsoon retreats, then comes the northeast monsoon that moves from the northeastern states towards coastal Tamil Nadu, thus bringing rainfall to Tamil Nadu, Puducherry, coastal Andhra Pradesh, and even parts of Kerala. So, climate change and global warming, which is warming the Indian Ocean and the Arctic Ocean, is directly responsible for causing changes to wind patterns and currents, and their ability to collect moisture and bring rains to specified regions. These changes are bringing torrential rains in certain parts during certain seasons, and at the same time, they are even causing dry spells in certain regions, thus aggravating the nature of extreme weather events. But upon this, the climate and disaster risk in states like Kerala and Uttarakhand has been compounded due to the kind of economic choices that our society has made. For the sake of economic development, we have neglected the environmental and disaster risk factors. And even in states like Kerala and Uttarakhand, where the disaster risk is already higher due to their hilly terrain and unsuited land for construction, we have carried out unplanned construction and development activities, followed by encroachment of key drainage areas, which further amplifies the impact of these extreme weather events. The human population of these states have become more vulnerable to climate risk and disaster risk due to these man-made factors, and in combination with climate change and global warming and the changing rainfall patterns, the country is witnessing increasing frequency and intensity of such extreme weather events. Next, let's look at a related column on page number 14, in which the writer evaluates the ecological and disaster vulnerability of the Western Ghats. See, the Western Ghats is a key geographical feature of India, and as you can see in this map, it runs parallel to the west coast of India. These mountain ranges stretch over a length of 1,600 kilometers, covering 6 states, including Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Goa, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. The Western Ghats begin from the Tapti River along the borders of Gujarat and Maharashtra and stretches all the way to Kanyakumari in the south. This key geographical feature is also a biodiversity hotspot as designated by UNESCO, and it is home to thousands of threatened species of animals, birds, reptiles, and plants. Over the last few decades, this key ecological region has come under tremendous developmental pressure due to rising population and rising economic activities in the region. So, in order to safeguard the Western Ghats and to protect its unique biodiversity and ecological significance, the Government of India constituted an expert committee in 2010 known as the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel. This expert panel was headed by noted environmental activist Madhav Gadgil. The Madhav Gadgil Committee carried out a scientific assessment of the Western Ghats region and identified its ecological and disaster vulnerability and came out with a comprehensive report in the year 2011. In this report, the Madhav Gadgil Committee had designated the entire stretch of the Western Ghats as an eco-sensitive area. It had classified 148 taluk divisions in the Western Ghats region into 3 ecologically sensitive zones, where varying degrees of restrictions and regulations would be applied for developmental and economic activities. The Madhav Gadgil Committee identified the Western Ghats as the backbone of the ecology and economy of South India, and to preserve and protect this sensitive region, it recommended the creation of 3 eco-sensitive zones by declaring the entire Western Ghats as an ecologically sensitive area where restrictions and regulations could be applied for developmental activities. These assessments and recommendations were in line with other scientific findings as well, such as a study conducted by the IUCN. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has also identified the ecological sensitivity of Western Ghats, and through a scientific study, it had pointed out the population and developmental pressure on the sensitive Western Ghats. So accordingly, the Gadgil report recommended severe restrictions on the construction of large scale dams, power plants, and mining projects in ecologically sensitive Zone 1, which was supposed to be given the highest degree of protection. Then, similarly, in Zone 2 and Zone 3, limited activities were allowed, again with suitable restrictions on developmental and economic activities. The Gadgil report also identified that in all the developmental activities of the region, the local people should play a key role in decision making in order to ensure a participative approach by involving the Gram Sabhas, which are the lowest grassroots institutions in the decision making process. But these wide sweeping reforms recommended by the Gadgil Committee was seen to be against the developmental interests and aspirations of the region by the state governments and as well as by the concerned industries and by the local people. This led to massive protests in the states against the adoption of this report, and as a result, the central government was pushed back, and finally, it constituted the Kasturi Rangan Committee in 2012 to carry out a thorough review and examination of the recommendations of the Gadgil Committee by keeping in mind the biodiversity needs of Western Ghats along with the developmental aspirations of the people so that a better balance could be struck between environmental needs and the need for economic growth and development. So, accordingly, the Kasturi Rangan Committee watered down the recommendations of the Gadgil Committee and it suggested that only 37% of the area of Western Ghats should be designated as an ecologically sensitive area and not the entire ranges itself as recommended by the Gadgil Committee. In total, it recommended the classification of around 59,940 square kilometers of land located across 4,000 plus villages to be identified as ecologically sensitive areas. But even these revised recommendations of the Kasturi Rangan Committee were strongly opposed by the states, the industries, and the local people, and eventually the center was forced to put on hold the creation of these eco-sensitive zones. In the state of Kerala in particular, the opposition to the Kasturi Rangan Committee and the Madhav Gadgil Committee was very strong, and after a series of protests and appeals in the Supreme Court, the state government constituted a state-level expert committee which recommended the entire exclusion of all inhabited areas, plantation areas, agricultural land, and industrial areas. So, from an environment and conservation perspective, this is seen as a complete downgrading as it doesn't take into account the ecological sensitivity of the Western Ghats, which today is directly responsible for increasing incidents of floods and landslides in the region, especially in states such as Kerala. Finally, as the center was pushed back by the states and the industries, it came out with a draft notification in 2014, which has further diluted the recommendations made even by the Kasturi Rangan Committee. The draft notification proposes to identify only around 56,000 square kilometers of area as ecologically sensitive compared to the stricter measures that were recommended by both the committees. But this draft notification hasn't been taken forward, and the center hasn't come out with a final notification yet because of the continued opposition at the state level. And in fact, several states and even farmers and other interest groups have even approached the Supreme Court to declare this draft notification as unconstitutional. But the writer points out, as a consequence of this delay in protecting the ecological sensitive areas of Western Ghats, the disaster vulnerability of the region has gone up significantly, and the results are there for everyone to see in the last few years. The devastating 2018 floods witnessed in Kerala has been designated by the World Meteorological Organization as one of the top 5 extreme flooding events in the world that has occurred between 2015 and 2019. Then, if you look at the areas where the landslides are occurring in Kerala in the last 3 to 4 years, these were exactly the same areas which were identified by the Madhav Gadgil Committee as ecologically sensitive. As the committee had identified, in these landslide prone areas, excessive human interference and unscientific land usage by both farmers and industries has destroyed the sensitive ecology, thereby exposing the region to higher intensity extreme weather events. Even studies conducted by the Geological Survey of India has shown that the cultivation and construction activities in Kerala, particularly in the landslide prone areas, are unscientific and faulty. But despite all these grave warnings, unplanned construction and development has gone ahead in the state, and this, followed by deforestation and encroachment, has made the state even more vulnerable to extreme weather events such as floods and landslides. So, in this context, the writer is urging the center to follow the guidelines issued by the National Green Tribunal to immediately issue a final notification that would designate the ecologically sensitive zones so that unscientific and unplanned activities can be regulated. Now, let's look at an article from page number 13, which evaluates the key provisions of the NDPS Act, which has been recently in news, following the high profile arrest of Aryan Khan, the son of actor Shah Rukh Khan, in a case involving possession and consumption of drugs and psychotropic substances. See, Article 47 of the Indian Constitution, under the Directive Principles of State Policy, mandates the state to act against narcotic activities which are injurious to health. Accordingly, India has enacted the NDPS Act, or the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act, which was brought out in 1985, and it is also in line with UN conventions that are related to narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. This act provides for the establishment of a central authority which will have the powers to enforce and execute the provisions of the act. So accordingly, the NCB was created, or the Narcotics Control Bureau, in the year 1986 in order to fight against drug trafficking and the sale, possession and consumption of a variety of drugs and psychotropic substances by working with all other concerned agencies and departments. This law contains very stringent provisions and also provides for very stiff penalties. Legal experts place the law on par with anti-terror laws because once arrested under the law, it is extremely difficult to even get bail, and the responsibility falls on the accused to prove his innocence and to prove that he is not guilty, thus making the NDPS Act a very stringent law. Under the law, the center has notified the quantities for each drug for its possession and consumption to be considered as a criminal offense, and it covers a variety of drugs including hashish, cocaine, heroin, meth, MDMA, etc. Under the law, even an attempt to commit the offense attracts the same penalties and punishment as committing the offense itself. Even if someone is preparing to commit an offense, even that attracts a strict penalty, and along with fines, it provides for very strict jail terms as well. The Act essentially prohibits the production, manufacture, possession, sale, purchase, transport, import interstate, export interstate, or even use and consumption of these drugs and psychotropic substances. The jail terms can go up to 10 years, even extending up to 20 years, and provides the central government a direct role and tremendous powers to enforce the provisions of this stringent law. So Aryan Khan, who has been charged under this law, has recently been denied bail by the court on the grounds that he had conscious possession of the drugs. This legal terminology refers to the presumption of the court, where the court presumes or believes that the accused had the intention, the motive, and the knowledge of procuring and consuming these drugs, and even this presumption is sufficient to charge them and punish them, even if they are yet to physically possess the drug or to actually consume the drug. Section 35 of the NDPS Act recognizes the presumption of culpable mental state, and as per these provisions, the possession of drugs need not be physical. Even if the accused is shown to be in conscious possession of drugs, that is, even if they are aware that in the future they are going to be involved with regard to possession and consumption of drugs, even that evidence is sufficient for the court to presume that the accused is guilty under the Act, unless the accused is able to prove otherwise. So on these stringent grounds, even bail is denied, and hence it places the NDPS Act on par with India's anti-terror laws. Now let's look at a column from page number 11, which provides an important assessment on the nature of trade relations between India and China. This analysis has been brought out in the context of ongoing border tensions between India and China, and even as these border tensions are yet to be resolved, and even as the border talks have failed and China continues to remain aggressive against India, a massive boom has been witnessed in the trading volumes between India and China. According to latest data, the India China trading volume is all set to cross the $100 billion mark, thereby making China one of the most important trading partners of India. For several years now, China has been India's largest trading partner, and since 1988, we have witnessed a massive growth in the trading volume between the two countries. See, following the 1962 war over the boundary issue, the India China relations were normalized for the first time in the year 1988, following the historic visit of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. From here onwards, both India and China put efforts to repair and mend their relationship. And as India opened up its economy through LPG reforms in the early 1990s, just like China had done in the 1980s, a great opportunity was created for boosting trade between the two large Asian countries. So, over the last 3 decades, we have witnessed an exponential growth in trade between India and China. But, however, this trading relationship is largely one sided. The current nature and pattern of trade largely benefits China and puts India at a tremendous disadvantage. This trading relationship has ended up making India extremely dependent on Chinese imports. And today, several key sectors in India have developed a critical dependency on Chinese products. Be it electronics and semiconductors, or the back-end infrastructure of power and telecom equipment, auto components, solar components, and even medical supplies, especially after the pandemic began, and even for active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is the raw material for the Indian pharma industry. The electronic and semiconductor components, power and telecom equipment that India imports from China goes into India's critical infrastructure, thereby increasing the strategic and national security risk, considering the heightened tensions between the two countries over the boundary dispute. Then, even as India is planning to make a major shift towards solar energy and renewables, 90% of solar components comes from China, thereby making the Indian solar industry extremely dependent on Chinese imports. The same can be said about medical supplies as well. Medical equipment such as ventilators, PPE kits, and even medical electronics, they largely come from China, and China's exports to India in this segment has shot up by a massive 108% since the pandemic broke out. Then, even though India is considered to be the pharmacy of the world, and even though pharmaceuticals is India's strength sector, our pharma industries are extremely dependent on China for APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients. Nearly 70% of the raw material requirement for the pharma industry is met through Chinese exports. So, this critical dependency of India on Chinese imports has led to a massive trade deficit, which goes in favor of China and against Indian interests. And our dependency, even in critical and strategic sectors, opens up India to a unique strategic and national security risk, especially at a time when the two countries are locked in a major military standoff. Especially after last year's border clashes began, India decided that it cannot be business as usual with China. Because in the previous years, India was willing to segregate the border issues from the larger relationships, such as economic relations, even when China was carrying out incursions in the border areas. But following the latest escalation that China carried out, India decided to impose an economic cost on China by taking several retaliatory measures. The Indian government has blocked hundreds of Chinese mobile applications on the grounds of national security and data security. India has even placed a lot of curbs and restrictions on the flow of Chinese investment and Chinese capital into Indian industry. Then, just like the Western countries, India has also excluded Chinese companies from 5G trials because it is believed that Chinese companies such as Huawei and ZTE have very close connections with Chinese security agencies, including the PLA and Chinese intelligence. And reportedly, these Chinese telecom companies are known to install backdoors in critical telecom equipment, thus allowing Chinese security agencies direct access to the critical infrastructure of target countries. So, on these concerns, India, for the time being, has excluded Huawei and other Chinese companies from ongoing 5G trials. And as a part of this economic strategy, India came out with a plan to reduce India's dependency on China and to make the Indian industry more self reliant. But despite all these measures taken by the government, the trading volume has still boomed. And in 2021, it is all set to cross the $100 billion mark. This would also mean a massive trade deficit for India, which India has been trying to address since many years. And India's biggest complaint against China in the trade sector is that China deliberately blocks market access for Indian companies by creating and erecting non tariff barriers, especially in sectors where India has a strength and in sectors where India is extremely competitive, such as IT, ITES, pharma, and agriculture. In these key sectors, Indian exports face very challenging trade barriers, which has restricted and denied market access to Indian exporters. But India is hoping that our manufacturing resilience can be strengthened through schemes such as PLI or production linked incentives, which is designed to boost domestic production, which hopefully can help India in reducing its dependency on Chinese imports and parallelly boosting the strength and competitiveness of Indian exports so that Indian exports can compete in the Chinese market as well. But despite all these schemes and policies of India, the trade volume has zoomed, and it creates a huge conundrum for India as the border crisis continues, and China has shown no willingness to scale down its military and diplomatic aggression. Then, coming to the last article from page number 15, India and UAE are negotiating a free trade agreement, which is likely to be signed by next March. See, after the United States, the United Arab Emirates happens to be the second largest export market for India. And over the last 1 decade, India and UAE have established a strategic relationship, and a massive transformation is taking place in their economic relations. The UAE is not just a key partner for India for ensuring its energy security, but it is also a key investor, especially in India's infrastructure sector. So, to take forward these strong economic relations, India and UAE are looking to sign a free trade agreement, which is in line with the strategy of the Indian government to work out similar FTAs with key trading partners such as Israel, the European Union, Australia, and even with regional groupings such as Southern African Customs Union. So, India has essentially accelerated the pursuit of these FTAs with key trading partners to add to the existing FTAs that we already have with around 16 countries. But over the last 10 years, India had actually not shown much interest in free trade agreements. But now, India has accelerated these FTA negotiations with all key trading partners following the recent FTA we signed with Mauritius. This FTA with Mauritius, which became operational this year, is the first FTA that India has signed in the last 10 years. And to add to this, India is actively pursuing several more FTAs with important trading partners, including the United Arab Emirates. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: examine the reasons why India is facing bouts of extreme weather. The second question: flash floods and back-to-back landslips in Kerala bring into focus once again the fragile ecosystem of the Western Ghats. Critically evaluate. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be given in the description box below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.